Ladies and gentlemen, we are back again. Thank you so much for being here. As always, today we've got a familiar face, Rick McCracken. He is a dedicated Cardano community member, a stake pool operator, as well as a project manager for a community project called DripDropz. You might be familiar with all of the above. Today we've got a video about Cardano, specifically the Vasil Hard Fork that's upcoming, what that means, what that unlocks, and then speculation about what comes next. So Rick, thanks for being here, my friend.
Hashoshi, thanks for having me on. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm very excited for the Vasil Hard Fork event that's coming up. I believe it'll probably take place by the end of September. That's just a guess on my part. So I'm excited for that as well. And I wanted to touch on briefly, what is this hard fork and how is it different than other chains and how is it similar to other three third generation blockchains? And that is, with the hard fork event on Cardano and some other third generation blockchains, they have this thing called a hard fork combinator. And what it does is you're upgrading the protocol and keeping the chain intact. In a long time ago, there's other chains when they would go through a hard fork event, it might split the chain where you end up with, say, like Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold. You have other chains that come of that, and that's interesting. I saw those occur, and with Cardano and other modern chains, you can employ these things called hard fork combinators that keep the chain intact. So that's awesome stuff. And so the upcoming one is called Vasil. It's named after Vasil St. Abov, and I'm very excited. Like I said, I'm excited. So there's some key features coming out. You're asking me about. We were talking about prior to the podcast, and those features that are coming out affect network optimizations and smart contracts. I think one of the main features on the network optimization side is the diffusion pipelining. And so with diffusion pipelining, what we'll have is, so a block producer produces a block. And let's say you and I each have a block producer, right? And my block producer creates a block, and it passes it to your block producer. Well, your block producer will validate it and then pass it on to the next block producer. And then that block producer will validate and pass it on to the next as well. And it goes from one to many to many. And it affects the propagation time. And with diffusion pipelining, what will happen is all of the block producers have to validate it anyway. So rather than validating and making the others wait, it will simply both validate and send it so that there are multiple parallel efforts validating the block because they're going to do it anyway. So that improves throughput of the network overall. And I'm curious to see how well that improvement is, how good that is. I do have a few notes I have to refer to once in a while because there are so many upgrades. I had to write it down.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, diffusion pipelining is a significant one. There were several papers about it prior to Vasil even being called Vasil and being defined as a hard fork combinator event. And I think one of the big focuses right now is unlocking space for different decentralized applications, particularly DeFi, which I think a lot of people understand is the mechanism by which you grow a blockchain ecosystem in general. You bring liquidity in, and that flows into other areas of your platform. So like, what are some of those other things? Network optimization is a big one. More headroom for block space, more headroom for transaction throughput. And then there's also some of these CIPs or Cardano improvement proposals. Were there any of those that stuck out to you?
The four key ones that I've watched on Cardano 360 and I've read from the IOG blog posts, those are a great reference for anybody who's interested in reading more. Please check those out. And the ones that I think people are most excited for, developers are most excited for getting out there, CIP 31, reference inputs, CIP 32, the inline datums, CIP 33, which is reference script, and CIP 40, which is the script collateral adjustments. And each of those tweaks, it's like a tuning of how the smart contracts are executed, and each of those tweaks will bring performance gains and user experience gains where the smart contracts execute more smoothly. That, in addition to the network performance tweaks, what you should have in the end is a much better user experience when you're using a DEX or a DeFi application or the lending protocols. There's identity protocols. There's a bunch of different apps and dApps out there. I did make a list of some of the ones that people are really excited about. Can I go through that briefly?
Yeah, these are projects that are waiting for Vasil to unleash. And listen, I actually think this is a good payoff because I've been talking about this. Like, I know of several. So Rick's going to lift the lid on who those are. So please, let's hear it.
Yeah, so I've got post-Vasil launch, and then there's also currently existing projects that will have post-Vasil upgrades and improvements to their products. So the ones we're expecting to see come online are Maladex, DEX software, Ardana, Ray Network, Liquid and Indigo DeFi protocols. You have Meld. There's another really interesting one, Jed and Shen, where Jed with the stable coin, that was created by Cody. ADA Finance. We'll have Revuto, which is like a subscriptions payment system.
Okay.
And Optum Finance, so you have a lot of different finance. Profilia, which is a privacy-related advertising technology. Project Noom, which is a music distribution platform. There's Paribus, Mihan Finance. You have Spectrum Labs, which is Spectrum Network, bridging over to the Ergo network. And DripDropz will be using some of the vesting time lock contracts. And you have one of the really big ones, Singularity Net as well. I'm not sure what all Singularity Net is going to be using out of that, but that's a really big one because they're currently running a lot of products on Ethereum, and it's also going to be available on Cardano, and I consider that one of those kind of bridging protocols between Cardano and Ethereum, and I even ran some of that AGIX through the ERC20 converter. It was really cool how they sorted that out.
Nice.
Now, what's coming, there's some of the currently deployed technologies will be providing upgrades post-Vasil. One of the big ones is Muesli Swap. You have Charlie Oracle. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I think MinSwap as well. Charlie Oracle is pretty cool because with that, so they've already deployed a smart contract type technology at the basic level on the Cardano network, but there's some of the features in Vasil are going to make Oracle's more usable and save a little bit on some costs for executing transactions and script sizes. There's a lot of cool stuff. I can't really speak to it because there's so many technical details, but we have hundreds of developers out there working on this stuff, and they're out there splitting the atoms required to make it work. So that's a lot of the cool, that's a lot of the cool stuff that's available, or projects that are deploying or upgrading post-Vasil.
Makes a huge difference. Like, I think one of the biggest criticisms laid to Cardano inside and outside the community is, we need to see more uptake of decentralized applications, both developers building things, and people using things, liquidity flowing in, because that's what's going to be the framework or the sustaining factor, how you start to grow in a flywheel effect. Now, I think up till now and up till Vasil, there's been some technical blockers for developers saying, I don't want to launch something if I don't feel I have the tools to make it a quality experience, because you really have one shot to get users on board and make them feel like, hey, I want to keep using this. I want to trust this with my money or my time or whatever that might be. So now is the perfect opportunity in a bear market to launch Vasil, hopefully in September. And then after that, you've got, in my opinion, at least another calendar year to be very prescriptive and calculated using data and metrics and community engagement. What do we do to prepare for the next bull market, whenever that is, with solid primitives in place, stable coins, you mentioned Jed and Shen, lending protocols like Liquid Finance, so many things that you can do now that sets you up for the future. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Rick?
So with the original launch of smart contracts on Cardano in the Alonso era, there were some limitations, and so this Babbage era upgrade brings, kind of leading us into the Basho era of Cardano. It brings the abilities through these CIPs. Now, the cool thing is those CIPs, they were written by community developers. Community developers had input. So the Alonzo launched and they went to create and deploy their products, and they realized, hey, there's something that can be done better. I think Charlie is one of those examples, the Oracle feature, and said, hey, we need this technology implemented. And this was over a year ago. So the CIP process works. So they started building out the CIPs and reviewing them, getting their inputs. Then the technology was implemented. Now it's coming out with Vasil. So that's, I think that's an incredible process when you have the CIP process, which was learned from the EIP process as well, is how do you get community inputs? How do you find out what do the developers need in order to create the products that you're trying to create? And what I'm really looking forward to is, in the future is things like, I have a credit card, and the credit card is backed by a bank. Someday, will that credit card be backed by Liquid protocol? Will it be backed by Indigo protocol? Would I be able to, instead of storing that value in a bank account, which is fine, and that's what most people do, and it's worked for many, many, many decades in the form of a credit card, will I eventually be able to use that credit or debit using JED that's stored in a smart contract or a DEX that's backing my credit card? And I think that's going to be the really cool stuff we'll see in the coming years. And decentralized identities, like with IMX, they're building that kind of technology out to where you own your own identity and you store that with in a certain way, right? And it's not owned by everybody else, and you have to piece it all together. You already have it contained. So.
Now a quick sponsor break, folks. Speaking of Cardano, if you want to connect with folks like Charles Hoskinson, I want to encourage you to check out the Mainnet Crypto Conference, which is running from September 21st to September 23rd in New York City, hosted by the crypto research company Messari. This Mainnet conference is going to bring together 4,000 plus crypto builders and thought leaders to dive deep into the current state and future of Web3, and that's going to include keynotes from folks like Charles Hoskinson. So if you want to attend Mainnet and network with these awesome people, you can get $300 off your pass today by visiting www.mainnet.events and enter promo code Hashoshi at checkout. Again, that's Hashoshi at checkout. Now back to the video. You alluded to the Basho era, maybe the next phase of what's to come for Cardano and what comes after Vasil, because the way that people's minds work. Once Vasil's done, we think that's going to be September. I agree with your evaluation. As long as there's no new issues that crop up, I think September is going to be the right thing. As soon as that's done, people are going to be looking to the next thing. What's the next thing that we need? What's the next thing that we do? So to you, is that full steam ahead to Basho, continued scalability, moving towards some of the governance conversations, or do you think there's other things in between that need to happen, that will happen? Like, what are your thoughts on what needs to happen next?
Well, I think for Basho, we're going to see a lot of scaling technologies deployed, such as the EVM-based sidechains. Now we have Mokamada running with an EVM-based sidechain. There's an IOG-developed EVM that might be called the Mamba sidechain, is the name for it now, but I think the work is derived from the original KEVM in Yella, but this is like the modern version that may be deployed. We have Hydra coming out. Hydra's pretty interesting. It's still in the early phases of research, and there's some testing going on test nets. But the Hydra's neat because the concept there is there's no notion of blocks on Hydra. There's just transactions and snapshots. So all of these thousands and thousands of transactions at very high speed can occur off-chain. And then there's these snapshots, and I really need to understand it better myself. And then at some point that is resolved and settled on chain. So you have the Hydra, you have the sidechain technologies. There's rollups. I believe the Ardana team is working on a project called Orbis, and many other teams as well are working on ZK rollup type technologies that were learned from the Ethereum and brought to Cardano, possibly improved upon from there. And so that and basically layer 2 scaling, what I like to call it is connecting layer 1 to layer 2 and connecting web 2 to web 3, because connecting layer 1 to 2 is where you're going to get this greater throughput where blockchains can handle much more data, many more users, right? and then connecting the Web 2 to Web 3, because most people, including myself, were used to, we view the internet through Web 2. And then you're interacting with Web 3 on the back end with the blockchain-enabled technologies that are out there. So I think that's where it's headed for it, scaling through the next year or two. And these efforts are in parallel. So while that's being built, Voltaire is also being built. So Project Catalyst just finished QA for the latest round, Fund 9, just a few days ago. And so the governance is also being built. The Voltaire Arrow building is in progress. And so Catalyst Fund 9 voting will start within a few weeks. I can't remember the latest date. It got pushed back, but I think it's next week. I think it's September 5th it starts. I don't want to recall specifically. But so scaling and governance built in parallel, and then the ultimate governance, I think we're within a few years, which in a big scheme of things is not very far away.
Absolutely. So, well, yeah, and thanks for that, by the way. I think I've always appreciated, first of all, Cardano's nomenclature approach. Basho referencing a Japanese poet, Voltaire, an amazing literary giant of history. I think that the biggest thing that I look to when I think about the future of really any protocol, but of Cardano, is the sustainability of governance and how the community feeds development, how it shifts from a more centralized fulcrum of development to a more decentralized fulcrum of development. That's, to me, what needs to happen next. And I think we saw some of that in the community banding together to say, hey, we're going to create our own test nets in the last several weeks. We're going to do more development work here. We're going to do extra work on CIPs, making sure our voices are heard. Governance is a means to that end, but so is Catalyst. One of Cardano's greatest assets, literally and figuratively, is this huge treasury to build cool things. So if you're into Cardano, whether you're a Cardano technical fundamentals person or a Cardano number go up type of person, either way, the best way you can support the network is to vote in Catalyst and vote for stuff that is building on Cardano, that's building infrastructure, more importantly, technical ones. The boring sounding things, those are a lot of the ones that are really important. I know, Rick, you and I share that opinion on Catalyst and voting for boring but awesome stuff.
Yes, we need the boring stuff. My suggestions for people now is anything that's connecting layer 1 to layer 2, anything that's making data availability more available, and anything that's connecting Web 2 to Web 3. And I know those are very general, but there's many great projects out there. And I don't want to cherry pick any one of them, but those are the keys. Building the core infrastructure now. I think the outreach will get there eventually. Yeah. Those are also important. So we do need some outreach now, but I think right now, I think currently for this and the next couple more funds is keep a lot of that funding focused on the infrastructure of Cardano and getting that built out. And also keep in mind, there is VC funding out there. There's the C fund. So Catalyst does not negate it. People can do both. You can get enough funding you need from, as much as you can get from Catalyst you need for your project. If it's not fast enough, or if it's not high enough, or if you didn't win there, VC funding is also out there. You can look them up and find them. They're not, Catalyst is not exclusive. The exclusive funding source on Cardano. There are funding sources, and plus there's also building out and monetizing a project. Like DripDropz is a good example. Came out the gate being able to get revenues, build a revenue stream to get the basic setup going, which is when you get a business bootstrapped, there's a lot of expenses. There's legal expenses and infrastructure expenses and hiring human resources.
Yeah,
finding people.
Yeah, that's not easy. Yeah. And in this whole space in general, Web3 or blockchain, whatever you want to call it, finding good quality developers to build a product is very difficult. Just in like the time it takes. Getting that developer to buy into your project and for you to pay them enough to get them to say, yeah, I'm going to commit to you for a year or two or whatever, contractually or not, to build this, it costs way more than people actually think. And my perspective is I'd rather have 2 like stellar developers than a team of 5 average developers. And that's not to say there's no room for average developers. Everyone starts somewhere. But you can build a whole product with 2 top tier developers in a lot of cases over time. So Rick brings up a great point. Don't be afraid of VC. If you're trying to build a project and you're like, I can't get Catalyst funding, I don't have enough resources myself to bootstrap the whole thing on my own. VCs right now are not in the will invest in anything that moves and that has potential to succeed in any way, shape, or form. They're being more careful. And you can do a venture capital type of deal without giving up a ton and without selling the soul of your project. So Rick's point is well taken, and I think everyone should think about that.
Yes, there are multiple sources of funding besides Catalyst.
Boom.
VC is a good thing. I mean, the whole world, everything here has been built off of somebody who is willing to take the risk and invest in another person who's a hard worker with a great idea. And the developers, I got to give a shout out. If people are learning Haskell through the IOG development course, Emergo has courses. There's a lot of training courses out there for Plutus development. And if you can learn that and execute that, that should work out pretty well. They're in high demand. I know they're in high demand.
Yeah.
I know they're in high demand.
Without
React
a doubt.
developers too. You know any React.js developers?
Front end, man. Getting a good front end developer, designer as well, more important than people think. You could have the best dang thing in the world from a back end perspective. It does cool stuff, but if people don't want to interact with it because the front end's ugly or unintuitive, you're cooked. So yeah, no, that's really important. So there's lots of facets to it. That being said, Rick, I actually just wanted to give you a quick opportunity right here towards the end to talk about what's coming up next for DripDropz. If you got anything interesting you want to share, if not, no sweat. But if you do, feel free to share it.
Okay, so what's coming up for DripDropz? We're working on the tokenomics, the detailed tokenomics for the out years, for the coming years. We launched with a baseline set of tokenomics that seemed to make sense given the environment. It was semi-bull coming off a bull, going into a bear. Now we're in a bear. And we need to make the tokenomics model that has lasting effects. So that's what we're currently working on. At DripDropz, there's other features we're working on where we have Project Catalyst proposals in for the Cardano Main Street, where we're trying to bring a payment system via crypto through normal means, make it easier for the average user. So we have a lot of things planned. The key is building out what you currently have and making it rock solid, making it available so users want to use it, so it'll attract people. And then the future vision of where does that lead? You know, can you build out a payment system that people can use it as the back end? And so there's a lot of features we're working on there. I can't remember off the top of my head what I should be talking about. We will be using vesting contracts as well. Time lock vesting contracts to manage the supplies and stuff like that. And we have a brilliant Plutus developer who's working on those, have them working on testnet, and we're tuning that kind of stuff. So
nice.
Post-Vasil, we should be able to employ the time locking vesting contracts on DripDropz as well.
Nice. We'll maybe have to do a full video on just talking through what's to come, what DripDropz is all about, demo maybe. Let's think about that and let's plan it. And of course, folks, if you're watching and that's interesting to you, please hit the subscribe button. It actually really does make a huge difference. That being said, Rick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today, sharing your thoughts on Vasil, what we have to expect from Vasil, projects that are going to be opened up by Vasil, and then finally what comes next. I would love to have you on the show again soon.
Thank you. I would appreciate coming back. You have a great day, sir.
Absolutely. You too. And everyone who's watching, thank you so much for your time. I hope you and your family have a wonderful rest of your week. And until next time, cheers.